Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Dave Whitehead, and welcome to Schweitzer Drive. For many of us around the world, accessing electricity is as easy as flipping a switch. But for those in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's not that simple. Over 30% of people in the region are experiencing a lack of access to modern power services. Dedicated to ending this energy poverty are organizations like Power Africa, a U.S. government-led partnership that advances inclusive, low-carbon economic growth in the region. They're working to connect 60 million new homes and businesses to sustainable power and add more than 30,000 megawatts of clean, reliable generation capacity by 2030. Here to tell us more about the Power Africa mission is Mark Carrato. Mark joins us from Washington, D.C., where he serves as the organization's coordinator. Over the years, he's worked in Ethiopia, Kenya, Afghanistan, and Colombia, managing presidential initiatives and developing programs focused on water access, sanitation, economic resilience, and innovation. Mark holds a BBA in International Business from Pacific Lutheran University, an MA in International Studies from the University of Oregon, and an MS in National Security and Resource Strategy from the National Defense University Eisenhower School. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Hey, I was doing a little bit of prep for this podcast, and there was an interesting statistics I found. So I think presently we count the total population in the world at about 8 billion people. Mm-hmm. 1.3 of those 8 billion people lack access to reliable electricity. 300 million are in India, but 600 million are in Sub-Saharan Africa. That number was just astounding to me. The people that don't have access to electric power, and that's why this is going to be to me at least a very, very interesting podcast. So let's start off in a nutshell. What is the purpose of Power Africa?
Well, it's kind of the reverse of what you just said. I mean, the fact that there's 600 million people who can't turn on a light when they need to sometimes, certainly can't power a business, can't necessarily power big industry, can't go to the clinic when the lights are off or do telemedicine, can't keep vaccines cold. This isn't the case everywhere, of course. That's not about a doom and gloom picture, but there's far too many people who can't do that. And that's just kind of egregious. It's not a tomorrow problem, it's a yesterday problem. And so Power Africa is about 10 years old. President Obama's second term presidential initiative with a singular geographic focus, with a singular idea that energy has to be part of the foundational underpinning of what we do in development. So Power Africa is led by USAID, a development organization. So USAID is there on the tip of the spear when we decided as a U.S. government to put development up at the same level as diplomacy and defense, the 3 Ds of national security. And when you look at something like energy and you look at the people who don't have it, you can see how that becomes a national security question, not just for the people in those countries, but for us. So Power Africa, quite simply, is to try to bring the end of energy poverty, to try to get those 600 million people the power they need, to have the economic growth those countries need to make trading partners for the U.S., but to have secure and sound governance structures in a place that has the opportunity, due to a youth bulge and so forth, to clearly lead the next century and all kinds of things. And we're there to try to make sure one of those pieces is put in place, and that is access to electricity.
Yeah, what we've seen throughout history, certainly in America, that electricity is the liberator of people. When you have cheap, reliable, you can read books at nighttime as opposed to trying to build a fire. It's certainly much greener than chopping down a bunch of trees and burning them. So it is truly the liberator of people. You mentioned U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. What is the relationship between USAID and Power Africa?
So as you noted in your intro, Power Africa is a U.S. government-led public-private partnership. In fact, I think it still is the largest public-private partnership out there. We're over 200 strong. And in reverse order, that is over 170 companies who have signed a letter of intent with some level of specificity on how they want to get to our shared goals of 30,000 megawatts and 60 million connections. Next level down, you have 20 development partners, and these are bilateral countries like the UK, like Japan, Republic of South Korea, Israel, Canada, many more. and large institutions and multilateral banks like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and so forth. And then underneath that, you have what's probably the core of it and why it's a U.S. government-led is 12 agencies. So 12 agencies that share not only the same goal, but make sure we work in terms of building on each other's competitive advantages to get toward the goal, right? And USAID was selected to be the organizer of those 12 agencies. So while as a USAID Foreign Service Officer, I don't direct any of the other 11 agencies, my job is to make sure not only do I direct the USAID contribution therein to the goals, but try to make sure all of it works in a coherent fashion. As you can imagine, the government's big. It's not always easy to coordinate things from the National Security Council to the Department of State, to Treasury, to Energy, to USTDA, USAID, so on and so forth. But when we work together, when you really see how the tools can fit, USTDA doing a feasibility study, US Africa Development Foundation out there, the tip of the spear, getting places where it's hard for a lot of us to get to, obviously using the diplomacy of the State Department and working through ambassadors at post, the Department of Energy, Department of Treasury. It goes without saying how we take this stuff, the gravitas these different organizations bring, the different ways they're connected to the international architecture, and then make sure we build upon them. As I said, it's not just 12 agencies aligning. There's 12 agencies looking how they actually work together to bring what is truly, I think, a pretty large goal. Now, we're about 10 years in, about halfway to our goal, so we're on track, as it were. But post-COVID, post-supply chain, as I'm sure you know, Dave,
oh yeah,
I'm going to attest, there's a lot of challenges out there now that are actually making the headwinds a bit stronger. And so we really need to now get back to this idea of pulling in the same direction and figuring out how our competitive advantages get the job done.
Yeah, the whole COVID thing put a monkey wrench in, well, the entire world's plan. So we're all a couple of years behind where we probably want to be. So I'm sitting in Pullman, Washington today. You're in Washington, D.C. Africa is pretty far away from all of us. And quite honestly, I probably don't think about Africa too much during any particular day. How does Africa's economic development affect those that live there and even those that don't? You know, what's the connection then between, say, us and Africa, and why is this important?
No, it's a great question. And, you know, and on some level, there's some great organizations like the U.S. government, USGLC Leadership Coalition that goes out there and tries to, I think, on a general way, talk about why foreign affairs matters. Take it out at the 30,000 foot level. I worked in Congress for a while on the appropriation side for international development. And it's interesting, right? I'll get the numbers wrong, so don't quote me. But basically, poll upon poll, you ask the average American how much I think we spend overseas, and the number is massive. 10%, 15%, 25% sometimes. We spend about 0.07. Maybe it's changed here or there a little bit. Less than 1% of our budget goes toward foreign affairs, which is kind of crazy to think about when you have big chunks like Social Security, of course, and Medicare that take it up. Yet people fixate on, is this a good amount of money? And our retort to this as USAID, and quite frankly, if you want to hear a good defense as to why international development is a good investment, don't talk to USAID. Talk to your 4 stars. Talk to some of the people in the defense community who say this is absolutely bang for the buck, the best way to make sure we can keep our borders safe. So the first answer would be security. Like any nation, we have to make sure that the nation's secure for our people. And that means economic security in addition to actual physical security, right? These are big markets. These are going to be some of the biggest markets. In fact, when I go to talk to people like you, Dave, half of my pitch is, why aren't you there yet? And I know that's, and you're there in ways, right? But as you said, you don't think about it on a daily basis. It's not the same market, especially now, I think after IRA, in the US, where there's going to be a domestic sound for so long in terms of what we have to do to build the renewable revolution, the climate revolution here in our own energy systems, is for me and us and all of us who do this work to get out there and say, have you thought about this opportunity? How do we get you on the ground floor when the getting's good, where you can build the business practice to understand that this is going to be a massive growth industry? Right now, as you said, the number of people who don't have power means they will get power, and they should. This is going to be almost inexhaustible demand as we go forward. And I think whoever gets there first and starts building out those systems and understands that the systems are going to look a little bit different than the ones we had in the US and had in Europe. They're going to be hybrid systems. They're going to be a room for a lot of different technologies, from distribution, transmission, and generation across the board, that this is a really good market. So I think to some extent, that answer to that question is it's markets. It's self-centered on some level, as it should be as a nation state. it's super critical. But the other point I'll bring to as well, and I think it's something we're always so proud of at AID and elsewhere in the foreign affairs community, is that it's also the right thing to do, in my personal opinion, right? It's the right thing to do in the sense that global markets and market systems have favored certain economies for a long, long time. And to some extent, as most of us believe in economic growth, when everything is rising, it all revives more, right? So you have to have some level of ability for everyone to contribute to the economic piece in this global economy when it comes to supply chains. The ability, of course, for critical minerals in Africa, but the need for Africa to be part of the productivity from the ground floor and not just exporting resources, but value added, of charting their own destiny. And for partners like us who want to help them get there, allow them to say, what do you need? How can I help? What is the process you need to get these energy systems built out? The entrepreneurism that comes out of Africa, some of the stuff like mobile money that we're, I think, just now getting into in a full way has been going on in Kenya for way longer than that. A lot of stuff as well in terms of the need to make sure that we build patterns out that are gender appropriate and specific, that we crowd women into all sectors, including the energy sector, both as end users, but also as deciders, as part of the strategic vision as we build these things out. Because as I mentioned before, a lot of these things, if we just simply look at history and try to repeat it, we're going to build the wrong systems. And we have to make sure we build ones that adapt to the context and the needs that Africa has today versus the ones that we had 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's some great points you made. It is, one, in the big scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. Two, that it's helping people, and I think as an American people, we like that idea. Three, it's if we can help establish markets and trading partners, that's good for America going forward. And I'll probably make a final point that maybe you'll agree with it. We can either invest a little bit now, or there'll be some conflict where we'll have to invest a lot later that we'll probably get drug into or sucked into one of the two. So it's for a little bit of investment now, we probably ward off a whole bunch of headaches in the future.
Well, and that's kind of that prevention point I made in terms of when you have a forester going for Congress and giving testimony, saying that is the best bang for the buck we have. The 2 points I want to make really quickly. I mean, I think just like the conflict one, there's also the climate one, in the sense of cleanup is always more expensive and really, really hard to deal with. Now it's expensive now, but it's going to be way more expensive later. And retrofitting energy systems is also very expensive, as we know. So as we talk about what options people have to think beyond, again, recreating what's currently there, but thinking what should be there, I think Africa has the opportunity to some extent because of the challenge, but to a large extent because of the creativity that's coming out of the continent. And I think the people that see the value of the markets. One point I do want to correct a little bit is I didn't say it's not, it's a lot of money that we do, and quite seriously take it very, very seriously on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer. It's your money, it's my money, it's my grandmother's, as it were. It's just relatively a little bit compared to other budgets within. And I think the idea that we spend all our money overseas and not taking care of our own is one that is easily debunked. Yeah. And then you go into the secondary point, which is, and the money we do spend is really well spent. We're held to incredibly high rigorous standards to make sure we don't waste a dollar. We at Power Africa see ourselves as always catalytic. The private sector is absolutely at the center of what we do. We know that much larger resource pools, companies like yourselves, the innovation, the experience, the resources you can bring to bear in a win-win business model will be sustainable over time. We never write a check. We can never, fix a problem with our checkbook, and neither can the countries we're working in, for that matter. Right? The money needed is way too deep. It's too complex to solve this that way. You can't just say, "Oh, if I had more money and if I can write a bigger check, I could solve the problem." It's going to take much more partnership than that. So we're always trying to make sure we're that spark. We kind of say that we don't follow the market. We try to read it and then accelerate it. So if we see something going someplace in 10 years, if we can get it there in 2, then we've done our job.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Every dollar we spend is important. I think what I'm agreeing with you is that in the total scheme of things, when we talk about the entire budget of the U.S., this is not one of our bigger line items on that budget.
Absolutely correct. Now we can make it that way. If you want to go up and talk to some of your Congress people, let them know.
Maybe I will. Hey, Mark, could you tell us a little bit about the state of the power sector in Africa, and what are the priorities of Power Africa?
So Power Africa, it still has it started as a development initiative in the sense of ending energy poverty. That's still right there. We joke, we have 3 North Stars, so I'm not sure what planet we live on. But one of our North Stars sure is going to continue to be that development objective. Those 600 million people, for any number of reasons that we talked about. A lot of them already need to get power and they need it yesterday. It just you mentioned cutting down the forest. It's not only cutting down the forest, it's like then breathing in the smoke. I mean, the repercussions of energy poverty are unbelievable. And every time I sit down and think about my own kids, and during the pandemic, we retreated to our safety of our home. Luckily, had power, had ability to connect virtually to continue education going. Now, as a father, as I'm sure many other parents out there would say, it wasn't easy for sure, but man, did we have a leg up? And that's all absolutely predicated on power. And you can't do comfort control in terms of like air conditioning or heat. The cars we drive in, everything is just it's just so mind-boggling to me that for so long, and we do this because I think we try to advocate for different spots, all of which need help in terms of education or healthcare, democracy and governance, et cetera. But how power wasn't seen as absolutely underpinning to everything is beyond me now. And I think we're starting to see that way going forward. So one is that energy poverty. Two, you mentioned that I mentioned before, we follow the market. The market's clearly telling us that the money wants to flow into renewable energy on a per capita basis. On some levels, it's already as, if not more competitive than other forms of energy development. In places like Africa, where I think distributed renewable energy, the idea of building smaller systems that are more resilient, both to climate change and to disaster, but also don't require massive investment in large transmission, where centralized grids are going to have to be part of the solution, especially in spots due to geography and also just due to finances, and who can simply manage those kinds of systems. So that's another reason why I think distributing renewable energy like solar and wind and geothermal and others make a lot of sense going forward. So I would say that's another North Star, the fact that we have to build out the energy systems right. I'm sure we've all heard the statistics that Africa contributes less than 3% of emissions today. However, if they even get to a level of development that's seen in India in 30 or 40 years, they can undo everything we can do in the US and Europe combined in terms of mitigating climate change. And so you have to get on the right track again today. It's the only option we have. And the third one I would say is continuing to make sure that we look at private sector as a way to build out these systems, and particularly looking to the US as well. The companies that we see coming out and playing critical roles, and now with the IRA, inevitably pushing down prices and pushing out technology, both here domestically, but then over and across the oceans, as it were, is going to be critical. So we've done some work recently and introduced something called the Clean Tech Energy Network at the Africa Leadership Summit just past December, when President Biden invited all the African presidents to Washington. And the idea was, we've done a pretty good job of making sure major procurements get in front of American companies. I hope you consider yourselves one of those that we've helped push information, and then we can talk about this in a second too, but work on the other side of the coin, the enabling environment with which you need to invest. That's probably a point to hold for a second. But we also realize that there's so much interesting technology coming out very fast in the entrepreneurial venture capital type of hubs that we have, of course, like Silicon Valley and around the Research Triangle and down in Texas out of Austin and around MIT. And I could go on, that, with the right kind of pairing and technology partnership might just be the next big thing, both for the companies and their business models, but also for the African markets, right? And so how do we as Power Africa, this unique ability, this government-led partnership that has a private sector yearning, get out there and facilitate that? How do we make sure those people meet? How do we make sure the technologies pair? How do we look from hub to hub, maybe, to say, of course, the sum will be greater than the parts if we just have the right people talking to the right people and kind of let things organically push forward. So we're hoping this Clean Tech Energy Network will build those bridges and make sure that we have two-flow information going between the U.S. and Africa.
Let's pull on that thread just a little bit. What have been some of the wins in Power Africa, and what are perhaps maybe not wins, but some lessons learned then too?
Well, in a general sense, I would say one of Power Africa's, I think, strength is that it has the ability to play across the entire spectrum, right? So when we look at what we do, when we look at who we partner with and those 200 partners, and by the way, I should mention that's just people who have signed on very specific, letters of cooperation toward the goals. We work with hundreds of more companies in the day-to-day business of what we are. I think is that we've been able to look at both things from a lot of different vantage points, or come through this through a lot of doors, let's say. One of which is the transaction itself. So what's it take to actually get a bankable project in Africa? Who's investing? Who's not investing? Why aren't they investing? What kind of returns they need? What kind of risk are they trying to mitigate? So very much a business understanding. And we have 70 transaction advisors throughout Sub-Saharan Africa who are there to do everything from reading business plans to helping very young companies to looking at very mature companies negotiate PPAs, for instance. But on the other side of that is who you're working with. How do we make sure it's an equitable transaction? How do we make sure the governments have the right systems, the technical capacity, the know-how, the transparent procurement to make sure that we're competing on a level playing field with other people out there trying to make development as well. So then we can support both sides, right? We can support both sides in somewhat of an independent broker fashion as well. Now, of course, there's always an inherent conflict of interest a little bit in there, but we do with our eyes wide open and very transparently. Like, we want to help Malawi, for instance, transform their grid code, but we also want to help these 4 or 5 companies, make deals there as they go forward. So I guess maybe one way to look at is 2022 alone, just to kind of give some example, put some numbers on the stature of what we do. We mobilized $234 million in investment and advisory support to off-grid solar companies. So off-grid being a really big part of that distributed renewable energy future I was talking about. In Malawi, we assisted with a 20 megawatt Golamati solar project that was commissioned last year. It's the first utility scale plant in the region to include battery energy storage. So we try to find those areas where we think the market really needs to go, where we think there's a technology that could be a game changer that isn't viable yet economically, push that forward. That money we spend, by the way, I should add, is always a subsidy, right? Everything we do is outside the market. Anytime we help someone like yourselves or anyone else, that's there because we believe is a way to catalyze further investment. But we know that sometimes you can't put that on your books. You can't necessarily hire that first net transaction advisor, or you couldn't necessarily underwrite that battery storage. So we're there to try to figure out who can help us and who could fund, including people like the Development Finance Corporation on our side, some of those projects, which will be at first subsidized, but subsidized with the idea of being bankable. So it has private sector investment with it, with ways of getting the revenue out, and then eventually sustainable, where it doesn't need us at all. And that's the end goal. Another big point we did this year, I think is exciting, is you hit this a little bit earlier with COVID, and we can get back to this point as well. But COVID didn't just change what we did to make it harder in terms of getting the job done. And then, of course, making the context around us, supply chains and people getting out and monitoring projects and everything coming to a grind. But I think it also showed us that cross-sectoral programming, again, getting past our own silos a bit, was really important. And while we had been, and others had been, involved in health facility electrification for a while, I don't think we really had a total understanding on how we needed to speak each other's language. So in this case, we put out on the advocacy side with a group called SE for All, Partners for Ours, Sustainable Energy for All, the idea of advocating to try to get 25,000 clinics electrified. There's over 100,000 clinics, by the way, don't have adequate power in Sub-Saharan Africa. 100,000. Can you imagine going to the doctor and they don't have lights?
Yeah, no.
Let alone all the machinery's been burned out because the voltage is wrong, or no way to talk to the doctor or electronically save your files. Everything starts over the day you walk in the door. Kind of absolutely crazy. So of those 100,000, then the 25,000 was an advocacy play to try to crowd people into space, to share thinking, to look at lessons learned and pilots and so forth. And then we, Power Africa, have just operationalized a global development alliance, a fancy word for saying usually when we go back and have a program for people to implement, we design it, have to do it somewhat secretly. We put it out on the street, as it were. People compete. We take the best offer, the best mix of technical and value for the money for the taxpayer. We make an award. In this case, we said, if the private sector can fundraise at least 1-for-1, and they did more than that, we know we don't have all the answers. This is a really thorny space. No one rolls into a rural clinic in Uganda and says, okay, let me figure out how I can mix my money with this clinic, right? Yeah. Probably a tough way to make an investment. So how do you make new financial models? What technologically do we have to account for? How do we look at operation and maintenance in health facility electrification? So this GDA says, let's solve it together. And let's go after 10,000. We just awarded that. We announced it in April. We operationalized it at COP27 a few months back at the end of the year. And now we're moving very fast with partners like Bechtel and World Vision and Orange and Vodafone to figure out what are the models? How can a telecommunications company be part of this? Maybe they can help serve and service the operation and maintenance on the solar panel when they work on their towers. Or maybe we have others who have in-the-box solutions already to go, some for smaller clinics, some for entire community electrification. And how do we make sure that when we judge success, it's not just the power we can judge and the amount of people who in the clinics we turn on, but we see better results that our health colleagues want to see. They see improved results in malaria treatment, let's say, or HIV/AIDS, or maternal child health in terms of safe deliveries and so on and so forth. So how do we make sure then that people see, as we started this whole conversation, that power really does underpin everything.
It does.
It's a means to an end. It's a means to human development. It's a means to economic development at an entire country level.
Everything you said, I agree with. Standing up a electric system can be, complicated or simple, depending on, it's never simple, but, it can be trying to build a network like we have in the U.S. is probably not the first thing you'd want to do in Sub-Saharan Africa for the electrification of, say, what was it, 60 million new homes and businesses. How do you go about it? Is it working with big utilities? Is it standing up small, like the solar stuff you were talking about? Or how do you go about, eating that first bite of the 60 million new homes and businesses?
Well, simple answer is yes, all the above. I'll give a short answer this time. Yes, please. No, it's all this stuff, right? I mean, to some extent, you do learn on what we've done elsewhere and what we've done in Africa. And a big urban center around Lagos is totally different than a small rural area. Let's say in the Sahel, right? So you're going to have to find different energy systems and different ways of getting at it. And I think that's part of the key, is not getting caught up on thinking we have a blueprint. At Power Africa, and I like to say we have a compass point. And then we have to look at the waypoints along the way. We got to learn from what we're doing. We got to make sure we know our strategic guardrails, but we then have to be opportunistic. We have to make sure we see what has a chance of both being bankable, technically feasible, has the right capacity, and then meets the need. So as you said, on some levels, we've seen a solar home revolution, much like we see in the States on some level with rooftop solar. So those systems are getting cheaper, more powerful, getting to more people, and they're more affordable. And quite frankly, that whole system was predicated on the fact that mobile money was such an easy thing to do in Africa for so long. People could actually make safe payments in small quantities that didn't disadvantage a company who had to collect a whole lot of small collections, right? It's hard to go out there on a boda or something and collect 10,000 payments of small money, and it wasn't secured. So based on and backed on this idea that financial inclusion was possible with mobile money, people figured out ways to build out these systems, service them, provide service, sell services, energy, and that works. But of course, that's not going to serve all needs. It's not heavy industry there. It's not a way to grow large scale infrastructure as well. Sometimes it's a matter of what is the best cost per capita per community, right? So again, building out a big transmission wire to a small population community far away from a national grid is probably not the most cost-effective way to do it. Other times, you do build the big line because you can put on an amazing resource like Lake Turkana Wind Project in Kenya and get it into your national grid. So some of these grids will always want to improve. Utilities, as you mentioned, are absolutely critical. Unfortunately, they're not a strong suit across the board in Sub-Saharan Africa. Most of them have financial challenges. Most of them don't have the capacity they need. Most of them are always trying to play catch up on how to look at technical and commercial loss. So we work on that as well. We think there's a role for the utility, but we also think there's a role for new utilities. Some level of just saying, I've got energy sources and I've got customers and I got to figure out a way to serve these in the best way possible. Maybe some on grid, some off grid, some standalone systems. Then again, as we talked about before, you build in resilience to these systems, I think, in new ways as well. To some extent, too, large on grid only is very expensive. And those big price tags in and of themselves become debilitating, and especially with a macroeconomic environment now where you can't necessarily underwrite the risk of the sovereign guarantees are hard to come by. Multilaterals are having a hard time doing it as well. There's just too many factors. We probably haven't done a good enough job, we collectively, of figuring out how to disaggregate the risk and then isolate the risks and then find the right tools to mitigate particular risks. Instead, at times, we tend to glom all the risks together, figure out what the IRR has to be, and then that's quite high. And then the return to go into a riskier market is even higher. Then all of a sudden you have a situation where it doesn't really make sense for a lot of people to go in and invest. We have to change that. So part of that is us driving down the cost. Part of that is working on the enabling environment side that the investors want to work with, that they have trust in the confidence in the systems and the procurements and the frameworks with which they're going to partner. Some of that is just pushing out technology. So it drives the cost down, like we've seen with solar, dropping 90% in 10 years in terms of solar components. And part of it's going to be making sure all those things actually work together and then finding the right system and the right mix for the right place.
Actually, listening to you talk about all this, I guess one camp, people would see all the challenges that you just described, and I'm more of the optimist, and I look at all the opportunities. I love the idea that there is, there's not going to be a one size fit alls for coming up for the energy needs for people in Sub-Saharan Africa. No, depending on where they're living or what the conditions might be, there are going to be different solutions for those folks. And as an entrepreneur and an innovator, which I think many of us here in the U.S. are, and I'm sure in Africa too, coming up with solutions that meet those needs and not a one size fit all is just if I was a young kid getting back into engineering, I'd be excited to work on these projects. It's not only are they'd be fun technically and challenging in that respect, but so rewarding at the end of the day. Well,
just take a trip to take a trip to Nairobi or take a trip to Nigeria, take a trip to South Africa, and come across the folks you see in some of these hubs. Some of the ideas are just mind blowing. Again, it's easy to get depressed when you look at some of these numbers, but it's also easy to get awfully inspired when you see the creativity of people out there. It's going to be a tall order, and it takes all of us pushing in the same direction to get there. But man, there is some really cool technology, some really driven people, some people who are just blowing open the doors of creative thought on how to get to some of these solutions. So every time I feel like the bureaucracy gets me down, but I take a trip to one of those hubs and talk to some of these young folks, see the entrepreneurism that's coming out of Africa, and then met on with our own here in the U.S. And then you go to some of these exchange programs like you see, Berkeley or something, and then see the students that are coming over and how they collaborate. The next big idea. We just worked with a great group called a company out of California called Natel, who has a brand new turbine design that not only is I'm probably going to say it wrong. It's fish friendly, but I think it 99% of the fish. I think it was originally developed for the Northwest, where they had a lot of hydro resources and they had a lot of issues with fish. Now it's a run-of-river solution that's going to be implemented in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Where
not
was
only
that?
They have some of the best algorithms for predicting river flow in terms of international competitions that have been out there. So they have this amazing tech solution on the back of an amazing manufacturing solution. They're working with the local or a U.S. developer who works locally called Symbian. And together they're going to go into the DRC and try and figure out how to put renewable run-of-river hydro with U.S. technology right at the heart of Africa.
I think I saw those turbines. They have 10 feet ahead is all they need for creating a lot of power, something like that.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong guy in the tech specs.
Oh, I was. I'll get back. This is a little while ago. It's some of this cool technology is it is amazing. One of the last questions I had to ask you, what inspires you? But it sounds like the last 30 minutes we've been talking, I think everything inspires you. Any comments on that?
Yeah, as I tell the team, very, very rarely in life do you get to wake up and see an absolute direct line for what you're working on that day, bettering the lives of people in Africa, in the US, everywhere. I just get so inspired by what is our mandate and how it makes a real difference in people's lives. And you can see that everything from the anecdotal level when you meet somebody who, maybe started first with a solar lantern and then got power in their house and now maybe is on an off-grid or an on-grid connected scheme. Now has the ability to run the local welding shop or the mill in town and sees generational wealth starting to build for them and their family, taking advantage of getting the kids in school and so forth. And then you see the big systems as well, and you realize that as we said, 600 million people is egregious. It's unbelievable that still exists in this world. From a business standpoint, you just said if you wanted to try to put a spin on that, that's 600 million customers. Yep. How often do you get to a spot where you have 600 million customers ready to take advantage of your ingenuity and your resources and your experience? So I just find that, when I started this career at USAID, I found AID for me was nearly the perfect mix of policy and pragmatism with the gravitas of the USG behind it. And so we really can figure out ways to make real change. And as someone who coming up through grad school and everywhere else who saw a lot of things they thought needed to be worked on, boy, did I land a sweet spot here as coordinator of Power Africa. Thorny problem set, super exciting, but a lot of hope, a lot of reason to be positive and optimistic about what's going forward, and a direct line of sight to making the world a better place. So pretty easy to get up in the morning and keep doing the work.
Well, Mark, thanks for your time and thanks for all you're doing in Power Africa. At some point, we'll have to reconnect and see how everything turned out for the 60 million new homes and businesses. I'm going to be following this.
Do it. We're going to get there. We're halfway to the time, halfway to the goals. I think right now we're at 160 million people now have power in some part, thanks to the partnership of Power Africa. So really excited to get that number passed. We're gonna exceed those goals because we gotta get all 600 million people connected, and then we'll see where the world gets. It's going to be unforetold bounty of riches for everyone, not just those in Africa. Once those people get power, and we get to be blessed with their creativity and ingenuity.
That's great. Again, Mark, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Dave. Look forward to it. We'll definitely have to get that coffee or lunch.
That'll be great. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.